forgot to board meeting.
So did you notice, or did you hear me telling somebody afterwards?
No, you told me.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. We did the 1150 Academy board meeting yesterday, and I went the whole board meeting, forgot to click record. So everybody will just have to figure it out from the PowerPoint.
Hey, Jeff, did you issue that PowerPoint out, the first one with the statistics, or how would we obtain that?
I'm going to be sending that out later this afternoon. I've not had a chance to do that, but yeah, everybody will get it this afternoon.
There's some great stats there. I think it'll be very helpful for people to pitch their HR department with too.
Yeah, I think so too. Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to send that out along with the letter that we talked about last night as well. All right. Well, we've got by my clock, we got 11:37. So I say we go ahead and get rolling. We may have a few more join as we're going. So welcome again to this special NDCIO Network Lunch and Learn. This actually came about during our last call, as you may recall, from Reveal Risk, talking about some of the impacts that they're seeing of the Russian invasion on Ukraine and the cyber threat landscape changing because of that. Brian Witherow, who's one of our members, is the CIO over at Shepherd Insurance. And because the topic came up during that call about cyber insurance and some of the things that you all are seeing as you go through either renewals or obtaining cyber insurance, Brian volunteered to talk to us, bring in Dennis, one of the partners in Shepherd, to talk to us about cyber insurance, what they're seeing from their perspective, and some of the ways that you might be able to make this an easier process, so to speak. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to you, Brian, and we'll just keep going here.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I'm Brian Witherow with Shepherd Insurance, IT Director, CIO here for Shepherd. Like Jeff said, after our last meeting, there are lots of questions and discussion around cyber insurance, and I thought here at Shepherd we definitely have people that know a lot about cyber insurance. So I asked Dennis if he'd be willing to talk to us, give us a presentation, answer any questions, and he was certainly willing to do so. So thank you all for joining, and I'm going to pass the ball over to you, Dennis.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to participate in this call. It's a unique position that I find myself in, so I'm grateful for everybody's time today. My name is Dennis Lizotte. I am Partner, Director of Commercial Production here at Shepherd Insurance. So my daily role is to work on any new business submissions that come in through the agency over $25,000 in account premium. So as you have other coverages, certainly cyber is one of those that is upside down in the marketplace, as we like to coin it, here at the agency side and at the broker side as well. So what I've done is I put together a little presentation. What's unique about my position is that I get information provided to me from our wholesale partners, our broker partners, our carrier partners, on a consistent basis of talking points that we should be communicating to our insureds to help make them more insurable in the marketplace, not only for cyber, but for other things as well. But then also things that they can do to help protect themselves from data breaches or ransomware attacks, et cetera. So a lot of that information that I have put into this presentation comes from probably the last 12 to 16 months of the data aggregation that I've gotten from various carrier partners or broker partners. And so me in this chair and what I do, putting together comparable proposals and solutions for our clients or potential clients, is derived from a lot of the behind the scenes knowledge of our broker partners. So one of the things I'd mentioned to Brian, one of the things I'd mentioned to Jeff as I put this together was there are people in this industry that they only do cyber. They live it, breathe it, see it, speak it every single day. And so they have a lot more technical knowledge than I do. And so one of those individuals that I work pretty closely with in the placement of accounts has in the past offered to sit in on a meeting such as this to answer any more in-depth questions or present additional information if needed or warranted or wanted. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you listen today to the information that I've provided. We can take a much deeper dive with the inclusion of him if needed or warranted. And so feel free to request that if you would like. So with that being said, I'm going to move forward and hopefully this thing. There we go. So here's the few topics that I wanted to discuss. Number one, cyber insurance. Obviously, with your guys' positionings in the companies that you guys are with, you obviously know the importance of cyber insurance. But there's certain companies out there still that don't think that they need it, which is baffling to me. So we'll get into a little bit of that. Current state of the market, which is I think what prompted this call today. Protection and insurability. So things that we can do to help mitigate loss as well as make yourself more insurable. And then a question and answer session. So I thought that this was a unique tool that we can incorporate. And I received this from one of our broker partners, talking to those people that say, hey, do I really even need cyber? I have a website. I don't really do online sales. I don't collect data, etc. And so here's a great list of questions that we ask our potential clients or our clients and maybe get them thinking more in terms of, we're not just collecting data. That's not our only thing at risk, right? I mean, there's data breach for sure, but the main thing right now in the marketplace is ransomware attacks. And if you see the request for what the ransomware attacks are right now, it's astronomical. Whether it's asking for cryptocurrency or $100,000 because they know that you don't have any backups in place. There's also that social engineering risk, right? So someone posing as a CEO of your company sends you an email and it looks legitimate because it comes from an email address that is something that you communicate on a daily basis, looks real. And so you wire money to somebody that is fraudulent in nature. So it's not just about storing or receiving clients' information that's at risk when you talk about a potential cyber claim. So just some of these things: do you send or receive wire transfer payments, collect, store personal identification or identifiable information, critical information about your business that you wouldn't be able to operate without? How long could your business operate without access to computer systems? Number 5 is a big ticket item, in my opinion, especially since COVID. Do any of your employees work remotely? The big thing with that is if your employees are working remotely, how do you have control over what they're accessing with the systems that you guys utilize? You have the multi-factor authentication in place for both in-network and outside of your network, et cetera. Number 6, I have some notes written down on my PowerPoint, but are you confident that your employees will never make a mistake? One of the biggest reasoning behind cyber incidents, like you can see, 75% of major cyber incidents involve some kind of human error, which is amazing to me. And I think there's a stat later on that I received somewhere else from a different data set that's even higher than that. And then at the bottom here, cyber insurance covers the financial losses that can result from these types of events. So it's not just about being covered from a standpoint of reimbursement or that cost to notify people. You're also having that backing of helping you put processes and procedures into place to protect your organization with the implementation of cyber insurance coverage. And then a lot of those companies also offer free risk security tools, as well as employee training. And I have a couple of slides in regards to that later on in the presentation as well. This is an important page as it relates to, what is cyber insurance and what are all the benefits that are related to it. So obviously, as we touched on, you do have your data breach coverage that goes into that, business interruption. So loss of business income because you don't have access to your systems and can't perform the job functions that you have to do, right? So everybody's technology based. If I didn't have access to my agency management system, I wouldn't be able to place new business, which is a loss of revenue for our agency. So very important. Cyber extortion defense, forensic support. So a lot of times if you have a breach and you notify the carrier, if it's a standalone market, which typically we're placing all of our risks in standalone market cyber specific policies now, rather than just putting it in with a package carrier, the $50,000 or $100,000 limit. We're seeking those standalone policies because that provides the broadest coverage in nature. And then that also provides the broadest services as well. So when you have that forensic support on the back end from a carrier standpoint, that's going to help alleviate the downtime. It's going to help alleviate potential additional loss from paying for ransomware or something along those lines that you don't need, or recovering the information that could be being held for ransom, especially if you don't have some sort of a backup in place. Legal support. That kind of goes in with the forensic support, and then coverage beyond a general liability policy. Like I mentioned, you have a package policy or business owner's policy, depending upon the size of your company. You do have the capabilities to have some sort of, I call throw-in coverage of some sort for cyber, and it's usually limited in nature. It doesn't protect you for all of the issues or loss potentials that you have. So it's just again, one of the things that we always do here is try to break that out as much as possible. I've put a sample quote in here. There's a few different markets that provide quotes similar to this. And basically what it is it gives you a breakdown of the different coverages that they're quoting, as well as the limits and the retentions. And it usually shows whether or not something is first party or third party coverage. So first party protecting you as the insured, third party protecting your clients if something were to happen with their information. So I put this in here kind of as a lead into my next slide, because if I look at this and I'm not used to talking about cyber or seeing cyber, I'm wondering, what in the world am I looking at? And what makes it even harder is that every single cyber carrier likes to tweak it and use their own wording, which makes it even more confusing. So one thing that I would point out on here, as you look at the financial fraud, so that social engineering piece, which is a hot topic in the cyber market right now, and computer fraud, you get into coverages similar to that, that have higher loss in the marketplace, you're going to start seeing sublimits. So I always, and it's my job as the person that is working on these quotes, is to review the quotes, make sure that, and then making sure that our clients understand that, hey, you have $1 million cyber policy, but for some of these other coverages, you're going to see a sublimit. And then if we need to seek alternatives to increase that based off of appetite or risk, et cetera, then we certainly can do so. You'll also see that they also have a separate deductible that's a little bit higher than the retentions for the other lines of coverage. And a lot of that is just due to the sheer amount of claims that they're seeing in that space. So just something to keep in mind as you guys start to see quotes on your end as well. And I'm going to, I think Jeff has a copy of this, so don't feel like you have to take a bunch of notes. Jeff, you're more than welcome to send this out to the group afterwards. So I want you guys to have just as much information as I do at your fingertips. So going back to this slide and then going to this slide, they don't line up perfectly because it's from two different companies. And I did that on purpose because I wanted you guys to see the difference from one quote to the other as far as terminology goes. But this is a very good tool to utilize as you start looking through quotes. If you have, okay, so what is IT security and forensic costs? What does it cover? What's an example of it? You can refer back to this. And then it also gives you a breakdown of first party versus third party. And there's a couple of pages here that goes through it. And I'm not going to go through everything because it would take forever, but I thought it was important to at least provide you guys with what the coverages are, a breakdown of what the coverages are, and then an example of a potential loss in that area. I put a few pages in there for that. Okay, state of the market. So obviously, as everybody knows, cyber insurance is one of the tougher classes or lines of business to insure right now. And And a lot of that is due to the losses that they're seeing in the marketplace. So historically, you go and give a carrier a entity name, their revenues, and their website, and you're going to get a reasonable price quote that you can bind in 24 hours or immediately. Now you're going to have to fill out at least a 3-page application to get a cyber quote, regardless of the size of your business. If you look at the number of data breaches mid-year by industry, it just goes to show you that there's no industry that is not susceptible to loss. Construction, that stands out to me. I mean, you wouldn't even think of cyber if you were in the construction business typically, but even in construction sector, you're still seeing cyber breaches. At the bottom of the screen, you're seeing that I think I mentioned earlier that you'd see a higher number, 85%, according to SHRM.org, of breaches include a human element, and 61% of those are related to stolen or misused credentials. One of the markets that we utilize for cyber insurance is Evolve. They're an MGA out of California, and they write on CFC paper. It's a Lloyd's of London product, and they have some exclusive built-in services that they offer with their products, which makes them unique in the marketplace. But one of the things that they do is they do what they call a dark web scan whenever they receive a submission. So if you see a quote from them ever, and you will see on the front page of their quote, the results of the dark web scan. And what it does is it pulls everybody's domain email address that's related to that website. And then it'll show you all of the breaches or the credentials at risk for that individual's email address. And it's pretty shocking. We've done it even internally, and it's pretty shocking to see. Now, not all of those websites are related to your business, but it does get the conversation or thought process started of, if they're being able to hack my LinkedIn credentials, what else are they going to be able to get access to and utilize? A lot of times, if you're talking about but if you're talking about cybercrime, you won't even know that they're in your system. They'll hang out in your system, and they'll be dark, and they'll be quiet, and they'll just watch. They'll watch the correspondence and how it interacts with how the CEO interacts with the COO or the CFO, and who the CFO talks to, pick up their verbiage or their language, and then they'll use that to try to mimic them as best as they can. And it's pretty sophisticated now. And one of the things the reason why I like the standalone cyber option is these criminals are changing their routine and their capabilities consistently. There's coverages in cyber policies now that you would have never thought of before. Contingent bodily injury, for instance. You think about cyber and how could I ever have a bodily injury claim? Well, if you think about now how the telemedicine is there, and there's certain implantables that you can have that are all based off of an app, right? So you can do it from an app on your phone, either give additional medicine or give whatever the case may be. Well, if someone hacks into that system and you're now unable to either administer your services, or if they are to hack in and they administer too much medicine, for instance, on something that's app driven or software driven, then that's where you're at risk for that type of a loss. So before I went down that rabbit hole, the reason why I was saying that I like to go with the standalone options is those carriers are so much more quick and nimble to change their product and forms to adhere to what is out there in the marketplace, rather than a package carrier where they're not as quick to change their forms and their coverages, and it's not anywhere near as robust as far as coverage goes. Next page is from a quarterly report that we get from the CIAB. CIAB stands for Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. So every quarter they put a report out, and it gives basically the state of the market. So I pulled the Q4 2021 report data from cyber. As you can see, it was the most troubled line of business in 2021, and that was by a significant margin. And so the average increase on a cyber policy last year from the respondents was 34.3%, which that's honestly kind of low, in my opinion, based off of what we've seen here, especially if you don't have the necessary protections in place. And you can see how fast it's grown. Or I think I said, 2 or 3 years ago, you could get a cyber quote with a name, employee count, revenue, and a website. And now you're filling out 3-page applications just to even get a quote that is bindable. Here's another different cyber index chart from last year. This is from CRC. This is one of our wholesale brokers that provide this to me. And as you can see by the graph here, the average year over year renewal change is astronomical from basically, I would say, April of last year, March of last year, up until through December. Another thing that I wanted to put is right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but cyber pricing is on the rise in a big way. So the percentage of cyber accounts with greater than 100% price increase are shown in those 4 boxes below. And that is an astronomical additional cost to our insureds and you guys as policyholders for something that is important. And sometimes it's one of those things is, does it make sense now? And I always say absolutely, because if you're put into a position where you're not able to access your information, then you're putting your entire business in jeopardy. So some of the cyber emerging issues over on the right-hand side of the screen, like I had mentioned to you before, a couple of times, requiring completed ransomware applications or requiring multi-factor authentication. I'm sure everybody in this group has heard that term more than once now. And then fully implemented cybersecurity measures. Now, that varies based off of carriers. There are carriers out there that still will bind without multi-factor authentication. That number is growing smaller and smaller. And my guess is that will probably go away eventually altogether. So anytime that you have that conversation with your internal personnel or your cyber market now, if you aren't required to carry MFA right now, that you probably will in the near future. Some of the difficult cyber classes, there's a listing there. We've seen a lot of disruption in our own book of business within the agency surrounding municipalities and schools. Such a great risk there. A lot of times there's a lot of people that have access to their systems and softwares, et cetera. But there's a wide range of industries, as you can see, that are becoming more and more difficult from a cyber standpoint. And then this is funny, I didn't even realize this. And then watch out for ransomware extortion sublimits. So kind of like in that quote that I showed you guys earlier on, you're going to start seeing sublimits on certain lines of coverage that have a greater risk of loss and more significant impact as far as a loss number goes. So what can you guys do to help make yourself more protected, number one, but then also more insurable and get that favorable pricing from the insurance company? Here's a cybersecurity controls checklist. I would say by no means do you have to implement every single one of these tools. However, it is something that through the course of time, all of the cyber markets out there, by studying losses and understanding what goes behind a loss and what constitutes a loss, have put together these tools as a guideline for recommending implementation within everybody's companies. So at the top of the list, multi-factor authentication, that is the big one, and majority of carriers won't even quote without that. Backups and incident response plans. So not only having a backup, but also having a segregated backup, testing that backup, making sure that that backup is actually collecting the data like it should be, and then putting an incident response plan in place. What is your response plan to a ransomware attack? Do you have somewhere that you can get access to your files that you need if the main domain or the main software system is under ransomware, basically, or lockdown? Endpoint detection and response is another one that they are recommending. And then there's a list of other security tools that you can implement. Cyber crime controls. So not everything is, system generated. Obviously, employee training is very important. Like I mentioned before, 85% of cyber breaches are the result of human error. And then dual authentication for wire transfers. If you guys do have any sort of wire transfers that are being conducted, dual authentication for anytime that you have a wire transfer request, you're picking up the phone, calling that individual, making sure that it's a legitimate request, especially if it's one that is outside your normal capacity. So example of that would be, you have somebody hanging out behind the scenes, unknown in your system, realizing who you guys work with on a consistent basis, who you transfer money to on a consistent basis. And you get an email one day and says, hey, we've got a new bank account. Here's our new bank account information for the next wire transfer. And you go ahead and do that. And it was somebody that was pretending to be that customer on the other end that you usually correspond with, right? So it doesn't seem out of the ordinary. But if you were to pick up that phone and call that person, especially when you're having a change of banking information, et cetera, that could be a preventative measure from transferring money that you wouldn't want to somebody else's bank account. So encryption software within the organization, as far as emails, we have that on our side as well. Tracking of software, and then segregated end-of-life software. So again, I would say that you don't need to implement all of this stuff to have cyber insurance coverage. It's more so here's what we would recommend type thing to help prevent any sort of losses. Here's an example of employee training. So here at Shepherd, we use Know Before. I don't know if anybody within the group here utilizes any sort of a third-party employee training system. Know Before, we do, I think it's quarterly, some training videos that we have to watch. And then also periodically, you'll receive spoof emails from them. And so it's basically, them seeing if your employees are going to click on something that they shouldn't click on, right? Here's an example of one of those. And then here's some tips or tools to, prevent that, right? So you're always going to see a sense of urgency in these emails. Not always, but typically. It's going to tell you to click on a link somewhere. However, the link doesn't take you to where you think it's going to take you to. So I think I put on here, companies like Know Before, utilize, provide continued employee training, monitoring through videos, interactive games, and phishing attempt emails. Implementing tools like these should raise awareness around the current cyber threats your guys' organizations face. And I went through that super quick. I do want to show you guys something else here. Do we have anybody in the group that's not in Indiana?
At least one on the call today, maybe a couple.
Okay.
I am not in Indiana, Dennis.
Okay. What states are you guys in? Buck and Rick?
We're in West Virginia
Okay.
and Ohio.
Texas.
Okay, so we've got all over the place. All right, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna show you guys something real quick as it relates to breach notification statutes. And this is on a per state basis. There is a website, and I can provide this. I could provide this to Jeff to send out to the group as well. I stumbled across this a few years ago, and I thought it was pretty neat. Can you see that? Okay, so I'm going to use Indiana as an example, just because that's where I'm currently at. But if you click on any state within this map, it'll give you some information as it relates to that state's statute for breach notifications. What is it that they recognize as personal information, et cetera. And I'm not sure if this is for every state, but I know for at least Indiana, you can download or you can link to the statute itself, and it'll show you what the statute is, how you as an organization have to respond in the event of a breach, how you have to report, et cetera. And then there's also, and this is on the state of Indiana's website. Can you guys see the indiana.gov website now? Just didn't know if it carries over. Okay.
Yes.
If you are in the Indiana and your state website probably has something similar, it gives you more information on that. But then it also gives you the forms, both printable and online breach notification forms that you have to submit in a timely fashion in the event of a breach. And it goes into information about, when was the breach made aware of, when did you notify the individuals, how did you notify them, et cetera. So these are great tools to refer back to. Obviously, it varies by state as far as what the statute is, but I wanted to also show that to you guys today. Does anybody have any questions for me?
I do. This is Todd Swain with Bowen. I'm going to add a little color to your conversation about construction because that is absolutely in our wheelhouse. We were dropped by our previous carrier at the end of 21 because of risk profile. It wasn't even so much that we weren't checking all the right boxes. It's that the size of the company and the industries we dealt with, they were simply not interested in taking that on. We went out to the market. We talked to 27 different cyber insurance carriers. Out of that, we found 3 that were willing to even give us a proposal. 3. It was due entirely. We didn't even get to the point of which boxes do you check. They simply weren't interested in taking the risk because of size and marketplace. But we also used KnowBe4. What I'm interested in is how you guys handle accountability for the training. What I struggle with right now is getting my people to actually participate and do it. And I'm interested in what you guys are doing. I have a direction forward for 22 that we're going to try, but I'm interested in what anybody else has got to say about how they're handling that situation.
Todd, before anybody responds to that inquiry, can I ask you what limit are you guys carrying on your cyber coverage?
I would love to tell you that I remember it was north of $1 million, but I don't think it was 10.
Okay. Yeah, you're seeing a lot of difficulties. Like you said, class of business definitely makes a difference to certain carriers, but also the limits. And then what type of policy are you putting into place? For those technology-driven companies that are managed service providers, you're having a combined tech E&O and cyber policy. I've got a client right now that does industry standard, basically online database of industry standards in the engineering field. And to me, that's not that risky of a risk, right? But to get to, I think it was $7.5 million in premium, we had to put 3 different policies in place at the tune of about $100,000 total in premium. And so, one of the things that I had mentioned before is going back to, does it make sense, risk reward, or does it make sense to even adhere to a contract? That was the conversation that I had with my client is, how much revenue are you going to get from this contract that's requiring such a high limit? Does it make sense for you to even move forward with purchasing such a limit? And in that instance, it did, and we moved forward. And so it's just one of those things that anytime that you're building up and adding additional layers, it's like an excess policy, right? You're going to have to pay more money the higher you go. So thanks, Todd. And then I don't know, Brian, if you have some comments to Todd's question about accountability. I don't think that I'm really involved in that conversation, or even a response to whenever someone does click on one of those phishing emails. Do we address that with like repetitive offenders, or how does that work?
Yeah, so at Shepherd, for accountability purposes, on the training side, the quarterly training that we do, end users, we have it set up so that end users get a reminder, if they're not getting their training done. And then after a certain point, if they don't get their training done, a reminder starts getting shot out to their managers. And so then their managers will contact the end user to make sure they get their training done. And then myself or, potentially our COO will eventually, if they're not getting it done, we'll step in and kind of get it pushed. Training wise, we're right at, typically we see 90 to 95% completion. Part of that is due to, we have our know before synced with our Active Directory. Some of the accounts that get pulled over aren't necessarily real users, so the numbers are skewed a little bit. And then as far as the phishing, simulated phishing attacks, it's sort of the same thing. If somebody clicks on a link in one of the simulations, they'll be put into a remediation, and they'll get sent a remediation training that they have to go through. And it's set up basically the same way, where after a certain amount of days, if they're not getting that training done, they'll start getting emails. Their managers will start getting emails as a reminder to get it taken care of. So that's what we do here.
Rosendon Electric out, and I talked with them at the last AGC conference, and they have a no tolerance, 3 strikes and you are unemployed policy, which is it's a bit more extreme than we're willing to adopt. But I get the argument, because it only takes one real breach to outweigh the value of any real employee. So it's definitely an interesting take, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, Todd, this is Rick Rush. Are you guys a union shop or non-union?
We actually do a little bit of both. It depends on the geography we're in.
I'd explain to all the employees, and particularly those unionized, hey guys, this is training, just like you have to be trained on certain equipment, and because this can cause the company to shut down and you'd be unemployed, all of you. So it's got to be peer pressure as well, that as well as at the same level, and just like Brian mentioned, at the higher levels with managers and so forth.
I would agree. I can tell you that from a training perspective, I have 6 vice presidents, and 4 of them have not completed their training in over a year. So it is a top-down issue for sure. We're just trying to figure out a way to mitigate it on the inside. We also use Proofpoint for email security, and we're going to leverage them a little bit. And people that don't complete their training are going to get put into something called isolation, which means they can still get their email, but they can't do anything to hurt the company with it until they've completed their training. So we're going to kind of use that as a punitive action to remind them, to make it more serious for them. But it's a struggle. People still don't take it seriously. We have daily stand-ups about security and safety at the job site, because we're a construction company. It's an everyday thing. Safety is supposed to be part of our culture. They don't see technology safety as part of that conversation.
Hey, Todd, can I reach out to you offline? I might have a method that might be helpful with that.
Absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Todd, you're not alone. This was a topic at our meeting that we had at the SIM meeting last night, and we had some large organizations, smaller, and somebody asked the same question: is anybody putting any heat behind their training? And there were several that said they were actively working on new policy that was going to articulate, X number of times and you're out. One of the larger organizations here in town said they had put one in about a year ago, and they had like a 6-step that had different things. But one of the steps in there was you lost your email privileges. And then it could escalate through progressive discipline all the way to the point you could be fired. They also mentioned they were a heavy company. They had contractors, and they said for a long time it was 3 strikes and then you lost all email privileges, but unfortunately with the Great Resignation, they had to figure out what to do with that because they needed the contractors to keep their head above water because they'd lose enough people. So I don't think you're alone in this. But it is, you're right. It's getting across to people that this is just, probably even more risk than somebody, stealing equipment off the job site, their traditional security type stuff. So.
Yep. Thank you.
Guys, my name's Phil Brossman. I'm in West Virginia here with Buck. I manage our Know Before phishing system. One thing that some best practices I've read for the phishing enforcement is to try to take the less punitive route. We had the same policies. We had a 5-tier system ending up with, you lose your job. And that became a hell of a burden to administer because of the constant failures. So we kind of rolled that punitiveness back a little bit. And now those people with 3 and 4 failures, they get to sit down with one of our security analysts. We sit in their cubicle with them for about 10 or 15 minutes and just talk about email security. And one thing I've also read is try to put some incentives behind some of the phishing successes, like giving out T-shirts, giving out candy, just try to have a little bit of fun with it. I realize that's not
Gamification.
Yeah, great word. I realize that's not possible in all of our business sectors here, but we bought some Swedish fish, and if an employee makes a good fish alert, reports an actual suspicious phishing email, we'll run down to their cubicle and throw them a couple packets of Swedish fish. It doesn't have to be expensive, but we're having a little better luck with more of those positive feedback mechanisms like that.
Carrot versus the stick.
Exactly.
Yeah, somebody else at the meeting last night had mentioned that they had changed some of their processes to also include more peer pressure. So I think that was what the organization talked about, having 6 steps. We all went 6. That seems so excessive. But where they got to was, it was almost like you failed once, you got a little remedial training. You fail again, you had to take a full course. The 3rd step was you and your manager had to take the course. And so you were bringing in peers, you were bringing in management to try and help encourage someone to, because what we're doing is we're breaking habits for these people, and they just have to understand that it's important enough that they got to put the effort in.
Yeah, I think it's also important for everybody to understand that, and I fall victim to this sometimes too. I'm, trying to keep my inbox clean all day long, right? You get several junk emails, but then you have, phone calls and text messages and emails coming in, and you just get into a rush. And I think it's important to keep everybody just being careful, right? I mean, just take a second, make sure what you think you're reading, you're actually reading. Because a lot of that happens, I think, just because people aren't paying attention. It's not something that they are doing intentionally, right? I mean, they're not trying to be hacked, but it's just about bringing awareness to it. And if you're not actively in the awareness training, then you're not going to be on alert to look for something that could be suspicious. And so I think, Todd, getting back to your comment that you guys have 4 or 5 VPs that haven't done any of their training, if they haven't done any training in a year, they're not going to be apt to question something because they haven't been having that in their mind, which that's why it exists, right? Is to just stop and second guess things before you start clicking around in your email.
Yeah, Shepard, we also basically inundate our users with information about cybersecurity awareness. Not only do we use KnowBe4 for the training and the simulated phishings, we have KnowBe4 send kind of informational stuff to all of our users on a regular basis. We do not monthly, but close to monthly newsletters, IT newsletters that will always have information regarding cybersecurity, what to look for, what's going on, what's new in the cybersecurity realm. We have a company-wide newsletter called Flock Talk that will often, celebrate something that one of our employees has done. So if somebody's come to me with, hey, I saw this email, whatever the case may be, that saw an email that was suspicious, I sent it to you and it was suspicious. Those types of things we'll highlight in Flock Talk as well. So it's not just KnowBe4 that we use to engage our users. We do it in other ways as well.
It's a good call out. Thank you.
So Dennis, one of the questions that got sent to me in email from a member that couldn't attend today was, do you typically see that the carrier has incident response resources in addition to legal that the insured can take advantage of when there is an incident?
Yeah, especially on the standalone policies. If you have coverage included or embedded into your package policy, no. If you have a standalone true cyber policy, then yes. The incentive behind them offering that service is because that reduces ultimately the claim amount that they're having to pay out. And yeah, that's something that's pretty standard on a standalone policy.
Dennis, a follow-up to that, is that an option, or are they requiring you to use their service?
I think, Mike, that would depend upon what carrier you're dealing with. If you had some internal or maybe even external third-party companies that you utilized, I would make sure that that's a conversation that you have with your current agent, current broker, and cyber market, just so that way, if a loss does happen, you guys are all on the same page heading into it as to who's going to respond, how they're going to respond, et cetera. Last thing you want to do is fight over that in the event of a loss.
Yeah, I just remember from 3 or 4 years ago when the market was even younger than it is today. That was one of the things that we saw when we looked at a policy, several policies. It was they required you to use their legal, they required you to use their forensics. And we were going, wait a minute, we have a lot of this stuff already in place, and we chose not to go down that path because of it.
Yeah. In that same concept, you see a lot of times in your management liability type policies as well, when it comes to either directors and officers coverage or employment practices coverage. Again, I think the biggest takeaway would just be to address it up front and make sure everybody's on the same page and how you're going to handle that in the event of a loss.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are insurance companies going to start taking industry certifications, NIST certified companies, for instance? Is that going to have any weight in the future? It doesn't even seem to be part of the conversation today. So is it worth pursuing, I guess, is my real question.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, one of the, and I'm going to come back with an example, and you can tell me if I'm accurate or not. There was a managed service provider company that we were working on a cyber quote for recently, and they were asking if they had a certification in place. And I can't remember what the certification was off the top of my head, but they said that they couldn't even consider the risk if they didn't have it. Now, it was either a certification or compliance. I don't think, Todd, if that's what you're asking me about, I don't think that it's going to alleviate premium in the future for pursuing certifications. I think in the future, it's going to make it a determination of whether or not you're insurable. And I think that we probably are far away from that currently, unless it just continues to go in the direction that it has been going, which very well could. But I don't think it's going to give you any sort of a price relief. I think it's going to come down to whether or not you're an insurable risk.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. I'm trying to, like, again, you're steering a big ship here. We were kind of floored at the reaction from our previous carrier and the new carriers as far as what they were even willing to offer. And to be clear, our premium went up almost 10 times, not quite, just shy of 10 times for the exact same coverage we had with the previous carrier. I don't want to get to next year's renewal and discover, oh, we don't have any options at all because we're not ISO 27001 or we're not NIST 800 or fill in your blank here, whatever compliance or certification you need to have. I don't want to find that out after the fact. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think constant communication with the insurance companies is key. Definitely don't wait 30 days before your renewal to start having renewal discussions with your current agent or broker. We try to stay abreast of, there's difficulties in other segment of businesses as well, and other lines of coverage as well, that we try to, the last thing we want to do is come to our insured 30 to 60 days before their policy renews and says, hey, guess what? You're being non-renewed and we have no options. Or, hey, you're being non-renewed and we have to take you to somebody that's going to charge you 10 times more than what you paid last year. Communication is key, right? Making sure that you're out ahead of your renewal, having those discussions, especially if you had a problem year this year with your renewal. I would, if I was your agent, I would hope that they would stay pretty closely attached to you throughout the course of these next 12 months. Of your policy term, and providing updates, maybe even quarterly or every other month of, hey, here's where we're at, and having those conversations adversely with at the carrier level too. Now, there may be some instances where carriers do take knee-jerk reactions, right? Depending on what's going on out there in the world. Ukraine and Russia, for a good example, that you can't predict or plan for, but you can hopefully get around a lot of that uncertainty through means of good communication throughout the policy term.
Hey, Dennis, this is Phil in West Virginia again.
Hey, Phil.
Got a question for you.
Okay.
Those questionnaires that we fill out during the renewal process. Several of those questionnaires during our last renewal asked us point blank, are you using product XYZ? And listed several products.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that we'd be paying a higher rate, or maybe we would not be able to get coverage at all if we were using one of those products.
Right.
Currently, I'm evaluating the purchase of a product that was on that, shall I say, blacklist last year. So my question is there a clearinghouse, or is there a list of those blacklisted products that the insurance brokers are going to penalize us for using if we start to use those products? Yeah.
Phil, I can go back and seek if there's one that's currently in place. I think that list probably changes pretty consistently based upon the change in the landscape of what the cyber criminals are doing and adapting to. A lot of times what happens is they start to see losses as a result of something that was a glitch within those softwares or systems. And so that's why they start to compile that list, because they don't want to insure companies that have them. Or, it could be one of those things where they're then following up with some additional questions in regards to alternative means of workarounds to that potential avenue for someone to get into the system. So I will ask. And if I do get one, then I will send it over to Jeff for him to distribute to the group. But I don't want you to think that it's going to stay that list forever, right? Because it could change at any given time. In regards to your specific software that you're looking to purchase or potentially purchase, not that a cyber carrier is going to tell you how to run your company or what to purchase, but they can say, hey, we're no longer going to insure you. So I would just make sure that you're checking with them and making sure that you're not going to disrupt something on their end, and make you have a situation like Todd did last year, where you're starting to see you're becoming either uninsurable in the marketplace or you're paying 100 times more than what you paid last year.
Sure. Yeah,
Bill, I can,
that makes sense. I kind of see it as a slippery slope. You know, if the insurance industry is going to not recommend the purchase of products or penalize people if they use those products, then yeah, in my world, that's a potentially a slippery slope they're getting on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, here's a perfect example. The insurance company can't tell you that someone can't drive one of the company vehicles, right? They can just tell you that they're excluded from coverage. And so that's the mentality, as far as from an insurability standpoint. They can't tell you what products to purchase, but they can tell you that they're no longer going to cover you as a result of that,
Gotcha.
Bill, we deal with several clients that have blacklists of that nature, especially in the power and industrial segment, highway, Yalink, Kaspersky. If we will have a requirements check for any of those new contracts, and if I have any of those products on site or in the organization, then we are no longer allowed to even bid on the job. So I feel your pain there. It's kind of annoying, but that's not even being driven for us. It hasn't even come up it's at the client level that they're like, yeah, if you're doing business with these companies, we won't touch you. So interesting things.
Other questions from the group? I've got another question that came in through email, and this, Dennis, I'd love your thoughts on what you're seeing with your clients, but also to the group, what your experience has been in talking with the senior executives about in your company about the steps that you are taking to protect the company, but not overselling it so that when something happens, they're like, well, you said we were protected. So how are you balancing it's not if, it's when kind of thing?
Yeah, from a client standpoint, I think there's two answers to this. Number one, I would say lean on all of the services that you can to provide you with knowledge around what's at risk, right? So the know before, but then also any products or services that are being provided by your insurance company, take advantage of them, because you're going to be in a much better position in the event of a loss. I hate that term, not if, but when, but ultimately that's kind of where we're at in the cyber world right now. You can check all the boxes and still have a breach, right? Because it only takes one individual to slip up one time, and you're going to find yourself in a situation that you couldn't imagine. You can only do so much to plan and prevent. You can't control what everybody does on their computers every single day, at every single time, at every single moment. So I don't think that internally here we have a strategy in place to say, well, we've done all the right things, and so now we're protected completely. I don't think that you can make that blanket statement. Anybody, no matter how much stuff you put into place as far as a protection measure goes.
If you disconnect from the internet and never connect to it, only that's it.
Right.
But I kind of look at this. I mean, I work in cybersecurity, and it's kind of like life insurance. And you go out and you talk to a customer or a prospect, and their response is, I'm not going to die this year. And sometimes it feels like you're selling life insurance, and I'm
Mhm.
saying from the cybersecurity protection side of things, because you have certain tools that you want to have in place to protect certain gaps. And I work with Brent Oswald, and I always say, look, the 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 last bastion of your existence, or last savior, is going to be the cyber insurance. So make sure it's good, make sure it's covered, that all your gaps are covered, and that may preserve your company when all else fails. But you can't just rely on that. You got to have other protections in place, to mitigate their risk.
Mhm.
And it's all about risk mitigation, risk avoidance. It's managing risk.
Yeah, and how much risk are you going to take on versus finance through an insurance policy? And just because you have the insurance policy, you still have the subjectivity of a deductible, right? So you're
Well,
still going to have some stake in the game regardless.
And I mentioned in the chat that if when you get those insurance questionnaires, make sure you include your IT team to go over those, because if you answer those questions wrong, you say you have it and you don't, that can come back to bite you when you do have a claim, or if you have a claim, and they say, well, you said you had this protection and we don't see any evidence of that. And you mistakenly answered the question wrong, and you thought you had it and you really don't. So, make sure you bring in the experts that know what you have when you answer those questions.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of times those applications, we're dealing with either the president of the company or CEO or CFO, and they're sending those applications over to the IT department to have completed, because again, if you're not dealing with it every single day, you're not going to know all the terminology that they use.
Well, and sometimes the insurance companies use terminology that we don't even recognize.
Right.
We go,
Mhm.
what the hell?
Yeah.
Other questions or comments from the group? Hearing none. Dennis and Brian, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate your willingness to share the deck with everybody. I will make sure that everybody gets a copy of that. And if they have any questions, it'll have your contact information in there. And I think this was a great discussion. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again for everybody's time and allowing me to join. I'll also send you the link to that website for the state statutes, Jeff. And then I'll circle back as well on that list that Todd was asking about, as far as, or maybe it was Phil, for softwares that are not advantageous in the marketplace right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I will send that out to the group as well.
Okay.
along with the recording, right, Jeff?
Yes, I did press record, so it'll go up to our YouTube channel this afternoon, so you'll have access to that.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks all.
All right.
Hey,
Thanks
hey,
again,
hey.
Dennis, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.